Hello everyone and welcome back. I am back with another video under the AIMS INICET 20 years PYQ series, and today's topic is thyroid. Till now 52 questions have been asked in the last 20 years, which shows the reducing weightage of this topic, especially in the recent time. And before we get started, I want to express my gratitude to all those who have already subscribed the channel and have shown faith in me. But in case if you have just stumbled upon today, make sure you hit the subscribe button or leave a comment to stay updated on all the future content. So with this, let's jump into the questions. Now these are the topics from which most of the questions have been asked. So let's start with the first topic, and that is examination, from which till now only one question has been asked. So the first question is, a patient with a nodule of the lump neck presents to the surgery OPD. A junior resident performs the following method to palpate it. Identify the procedure shown below. See, this is the Lehes method. See, here the doctor is actually going to push the thyroid gland from one side and palpate it from the other side. Now let's also see the images of the other methods that has been given in the options. So the first one is the Kryle's method. Here the doctor is actually going to push the thyroid gland from the thumb and ask the patient to swallow, and with this he or she can palpate the small nodules even if present in the glands. Now the second is again the Lehes method. See how a lateral push has been given and palpated from the other side. Now the third test that was given was Pemberton's sign or the Pemberton's method. In this, if a patient is asked to raise his hands above the head and maintain it for 2 to 3 minutes, and if there is a facial congestion or engorgement of the neck veins is present, it's a positive signs, and that indicates retrosternal goiter. See, you can look at the difference how facial congestion is seen in this patient. And the fourth test is the Cocker's test. Now here we just compress the trachea and look if a stridor is present or not. Just remember that there is a Cocker's sign also in the thyroid diseases, where you can see the starey look in the patient. Now let's come to the second topic, and it is thyroglossal cyst, from which 5 questions have been asked and most of them are in the recent year. See, a 25-year-old patient presented with a neck swelling which moves with degglutination as shown below. What is your probable diagnosis? See, this is the image that was shown, and it moves with degglutination. So this is mostly a thyroglossal cyst. Now these are two another questions which have been asked from the ENT section, but since they are on this topic, so this is important here. Now before we move to the question, let's look at some of the pointers of the thyroglossal cyst. First of all, it moves with degglutination. Second, it is the only swelling or the cyst in the neck which moves with tongue protrusion. And other neck swellings, or we can say the DDs of the swellings which move with degglutination, are the thyroid swelling, the subhyoid bursitis or the dermoid cyst. But remember, thyroglossal cyst not only moves with degglutination, it also moves with trunk protrusion, making it different from the other swellings. Third important point is that for its removal a procedure is done, and that is known as Sistrung's operation. Here we excise the whole thyroglossal tract involving the body of the hyoid bone and suprahyoid tract, and no incision and drainage is done here, just this complete removal is done. Next very important is that the most common site of this is infrahyoid, or what we call as subhyoid location, which is present in 65% of the cases, and the suprahyoid is only present in 20% of the cases. Now this is a congenital defect, and the lining of it is a pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium, which is different from that of a thyroglossal fistula, which has columnar epithelium as a lining. So this is a very important point which you should not miss. Now with this, let's look at the question: which of the following statement about the thyroglossal cyst are true except? So they are asking the wrong statement. The cyst is located within 2 cm of the midline. Yes, this is a right statement. The incision and drainage is a treatment of choice. I just now told you complete removal with the removal of the tract and the body of the hyoid bone is the treatment of choice, which is known as Sistrung's operation. The swelling moves up on protrusion of the tongue, right? It is a frequent cause of anterior midline neck masses in the first decade of life. Completely right. So this B is the answer. False statement about the thyroglossal duct cyst is infected thyroglossal cyst from the sinus. That's right. If the cyst becomes infected, it can create sinuses and fistulas as well. It is lined by pseudostratified columnar epithelium. That's also right. 40% of the cases have subhyoid. I told you the most common location is subhyoid and it is present in 65% of the cases. So the answer of this question is C. Now let's look at the last option. It is due to congenital defect. Absolutely right. So the answer is C. Now with this, let's come to the another topic, and that is investigations, from which till now 6 questions have been asked in 4 unique ways. See, the first question says is there is an 18-year-old girl who presents with thyrotoxic symptoms, yani that is she is symptomatic, and 9 months history of neck swelling. So there is a swelling present. On investigation, increased T4, the T4 is increased and the TSH is reduced. And there is a palpable 2 centimeter nodule was found. What next investigation should be done, or what next step should be done? See, I will show you a table and 2 important points for any kind of investigations done for a thyroid nodule. See, the first thing you need to notice is that whenever there is a thyroid nodule, you will look if it is symptomatic or not. If it is a symptomatic case, in that situation you will directly go for the imaging techniques like CT or MRI, because most probably in the question they would have given that USG has already been done. Now next, if the patient is asymptomatic and the size is less than 1 centimeter, we'll just go for clinical follow-up. But if the patient is asymptomatic and the size of the nodule is more than 1 centimeter in the size, the first investigation you're going to order is for the TSH. Now if the TSH is low, then you will go for scintigraphy to look for the functionality of the nodule. Then if the nodule is hyperfunctioning, we'll evaluate and treat for hypothyroidism. But if it is iso and hypofunctioning, we'll look at the other point. Now in case in the first investigation, if it is normal TSH, that in such a situation the next thing you will do is to go for an ultrasound if it has not been already done. And if in case it has already been done, then the next investigation we are going to order is the FNAC. Now a very important point here, I would tell you that biopsy with FNAC is to be done for all the nodules who are more than 1 centimeter. If the patient has a normal TSH, see, I told you if a patient has low TSH, we'll go for the nuclear scanning. But in case if the nodule is more than 1 centimeter and the thyroid functions are normal, we will always go for the FNAC if ultrasound has not been done. So the answer of this question would have been thyroid scan. Now next question, a fine needle aspiration cytology is not enough. See, FNAC can detect the difference between the benign and the malignant condition, but there is one carcinoma, that is the follicular carcinoma of the thyroid, where we cannot differentiate between the follicular carcinoma and follicular adenomas. The reason being that the difference between the two is because of the vascular or the capsular invasion, which cannot be diagnosed via the FNAC. Recently a very different question was asked, and it says which of the following statement is correct regarding the adequate thyroid FNAC sampling. Many options were given and they wanted to know if you can read the FNAC sampling or findings. So see, the adequate criteria for a thyroid FNAC adequacy is if there are 6 groups with at least 10 cells in each group, or there are 10 groups with at least 20 cells in each group, then it is considered as an adequate finding. So the answer was 6 follicular clusters each with 10 cells. Just remember these 2 points and that is sufficient. Now next question is FNAC cannot detect, see, repeat question. So this was asked around 2014 and 15 and now it repeated recently. So the answer would be follicular carcinoma. Now another very important table that I want you to remember is that if there is a solitary thyroid nodule, we go for the FNAC, I told you just now. So in case if in FNAC it is non-diagnostic, will repeat, but if it is a benign condition, okay, and it is a cyst, will aspirate, and if it is a colloid nodule, we will give T4 therapy and we will look for the symptoms. Now in case if it is malignant, we'll directly do the thyroidectomy. So FNAC can easily differentiate between the benign and the malignant. But in case if it is inconspicuous or it is suspicious, Then we will next order radioiodine ablation scan, and we will look for the nodules, whether they are cold or hot. And just remember one point, that most of the nodules which are cold, that is which who do not take the radioactive iodine, these are malignant, and they are malignant, they have a chance to convert into 15 to 20% cases, whereas in the hot nodules the chance of malignancy is only 1 to 2%. So remember, cold nodules are always mostly malignant, so we directly go for thyroidectomy, right? But hot nodules, they are not so malignant and they are mostly benign, so we order for either radioactive iodine ablation or thyroidectomy. Now another important topic, the solitary thyroid nodule. 6 questions have been asked from this. See, this is the repeat question I showed you above. So here the answer would be thyroid scan, and this can be marked from the table I showed you above. Just mug up that table because it is very important, and I will show you how important that is. Second, true about the management of a 45-year-old euthyroid male patient presenting with 4 into 4 centimeter mobile right-sided solitary thyroid nodule of 5 months duration. So see, multiple options are given, and so they told that FNAC is the investigation of choice. See, FNAC will be able to differentiate between benign and malignant changes. So it is the investigation of choice, and patient should undergo hemithyroidectomy if FNAC report is inconclusive. I just now told you, either hemithyroidectomy or RAI can be done. And indirect laryngoscope should be done in the preoperative period to assess the mobility of the vocal cord. Now this is also very important because the surrounding structure involvement is very frequent in thyroid carcinoma. Now I told you what should be the next investigation that should be done in such a case. See, it is a 4 centimeter nodule and it is euthyroid, that it is asymptomatic. So the next investigation you will order will be serum TSH. I told you from that table. Now another question, a central midline neck swelling is noted in a 4-year-old girl posted for tonsillectomy. The swelling is a painless mobile cystic just below the hyoid bone. Ultrasound showed a thick walled cystic lesion. What management should be done? The management should be surgical removal, and most probably it is a thyroglossal cyst. See, look at the age, or it can be certain other cysts also which can be detected with the clinical tests or with the investigations. So main in management, if it is a thyroglossal cyst, would be a surgical removal and not incision and drainage. Incision and drainage would not be the answer. Surgical removal, systems operation if it is a thyroglossal cyst. Now next question, a 12-year-old girl presented with a nodular goiter. Which of the following statement is correct regarding her evaluation and management is incorrect? See, the first statement is technetium-99 scan should be performed to determine whether the nodules are hypofunctioning and hyper. Yes, that's a right statement. Just recall the table. Functional thyroid nodules are usually benign. Yes, functional ones are hot nodules, the one who take up the radioactive iodine. All nodules more than 4 cm should be resected irrespective of the cytology. Okay, let's see. FNAC should be performed for all nodules more than 1 cm in diameter. See, not for all the nodules. Now, this is a very, FNAC should be done in all the nodules who are more than 1 cm. That's absolutely right. And this statement, all nodules more than 4 cm should be resected irrespective of the cytology. I showed you the table above that not all nodules should be resected. Only those who come out to be malignant or about which we are suspicious, only those should be resected. So this is the answer. Now another very important question, what will be the most likely associated condition with increased TSH and low T4 level? See, TSH secrete T3 and T4 and they give a negative feedback to it. So if the T3, T4 is in this question low, and that means the TSH is high. So if it is a primary thyroid issue only, that if the T3, T4 are low, the TSH due to feedback will be high. And if it is a secondary condition, because of the associated diseases of the pituitary or hypothalamus, then if the TSH is low, only then the T3, T4 would be low. So remember this relation. So here the answer would be Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and you can see the primary the causes for low T4 levels are Hashimoto's, the radioiodine ablation therapy for Graves, post-thyroidectomy, excessive iodine intake in Wolff-Chekhov's effect, subacute thyroiditis, medications and iodine deficiency. Anything which affect the thyroid gland and cause hypothyroidism. Secondary, where the causes to reduce the thyroid levels can be pituitary tumors or pituitary resections or ablation. Now this table for hypo and another table for hyper is very important. Just refer to your notes again. Now let's come to another very important topics from which recently more questions have been asked. 11 questions have been asked, and many questions are asked from the path section, like what will be the findings of this carcinoma, or they will give certain findings and they will ask you, where it can be found. So like for example, orphan NEI nuclei which is seen in the papillary carcinoma. So such questions are asked. So another question is treatment of the medullary carcinoma thyroid. See, medullary carcinoma thyroid are shown to have no effect with chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and no role of thyroid scan or radioiodine ablation is there. Chemotherapy, radiotherapy is only given in cases which are recurrent or which are high risk. So here the treatment would only be surgery, the types of surgery depending upon the level involved. Next question, the treatment of medullary carcinoma thyroid is surgery only. Don't mark radiotherapy or adjuvant chemotherapy. No, this is wrong. These are given only in cases which are showing high risk phenomena or which have recurrent cases. So just remember, there is no role of thyroid scan or RAI, and in CT scan and RT only recurrent cases and high risk. Now, which of the following would be the best treatment for 2 cm thyroid nodule in a 50-year-old man with FNSC revealing papillary carcinoma? See, for papillary carcinoma, which are less malignant, but it can also spread. So we prophylactically do total thyroidectomy with left-sided modified neck resection. Will not prefer hemithyroidectomy and leave a part of the carcinoma into the gland, or near total thyroidectomy or any kind of hemithyroidectomy. See, we will do modified neck dissection, left-sided, because they have not written anywhere that the cervical lymph nodes are involved. But in case they have shown that this type of level of lymph node is involved, then mark for total modified neck dissection. Now another very important point, that RET proto-oncogene mutation is a hallmark. See, it can be seen in other, but it is a hallmark of medullary carcinoma thyroid. Now another question about the papillary carcinoma. They are asking the true statement. So they gave multiple options and the correct was it can be reliably diagnosed under the FNSC. Papillary, though, it can be easily identified. Okay, not the follicular one. Typically spreads to the cervical lymph nodes and require total thyroidectomy for large tumor. Yes. So it easily spreads to the cervical lymph nodes, and that is why we did the left-sided in that case, even when no cervical lymph node was given. Now another question is lateral aberrant thyroid. What does lateral aberrant thyroid means? It means any metastatic foci from the primary in the thyroid. Now next question, all the following are true about Hashimoto's thyroiditis. See, this question is mostly asked in medicine. About the Hashimoto's and Graves and other conditions of hypo and hyper. So here the wrong statement would be orphan NEI nuclei, because this is a classical feature of papillary carcinoma. It is not seen in any kind of Hashimoto's thyroiditis or any other autoimmune conditions of the thyroid. See, we can see follicular destruction because autoantibodies are formed against it. There is increase in the lymphocyte, it is a thyroiditis, so inflammation will definitely be present, and oncocytic metaplasia can be seen, but orphan NEI nuclei will not be seen. Now another very important question on the treatment of choice for anaplastic carcinoma. See, anaplastic carcinomas are aggressive. So A for anaplastic, A for aggression. So they spread very easily and they're very fast growing. So they rapidly infiltrate the surrounding areas, and so they infiltrate trachea and sternum. So the only treatment of choice, if it is detected early, can be aggressive surgery, but the main treatment is only palliative treatment. It has already infiltrated trachea and sternum. Another question, least malignant thyroid cancer. I told you it is papillary carcinoma. Now next topic is thyroidectomy. 16 questions have been asked from the procedure itself. So this makes it an important one. Hypothyroidism following the thyroid surgery usually occurs after 2 to 5 days, right? This is important. And complications of total thyroidectomy include airway obstruction, hemorrhages and hoarseness. And remember, the most common is basically hemorrhage. So this is most common. And next question, a patient underwent thyroidectomy for hyperthyroidism 2 days later, he presented with features of thyroid storm. What is the most likely cause? Now, this is a very important topic, thyroid storm, not only under the surgery but also under the medicine section. So, there they mostly ask about the drugs or the treatment plan. Here they mostly, in surgery section, they ask about the causes. See, the most common cause is inadequate patient preparation. Then other causes can be sudden cessation of the drugs, any antithyroid drugs you are taking and you suddenly stop it. Third can be stress, due to infections, post-surgery or trauma. And the last can be acute iodine load. So, when you inject amiodarone or you give radioactive iodine ablation therapy or you do inject iodinated contrast agents. So, because of that also sometimes thyroid storms can occur. But the most common cause is inadequate patient preparation. So, if you look at the question again, the most likely cause would be inadequate pre-operative preparation, and this question have been repeated exactly 4 to 5 times. And last year also this question was asked exactly same. Now another very recent questions regarding this. Pick up from the following the usual cause of thyroid storm in thyroidectomy. See, again inadequate patient preparation, same question. See, remember in thyroid storm the most common cause of death is atrial fibrillations and cardiac failure, and the drug of choice to control it is propylthiouracil. And since the cause of death can be atrial fibrillation and cardiac failure, so here we give digoxin as a drug also. So if that is given in the question, it's right. Okay, so this question has been asked 6 times exactly same. So remember this answer. Now next question, a 32-year female patient with Graves' disease with eye signs and enlarged thyroid is planned for total thyroidectomy. What can be given in the pre-operative period to reduce the intraoperative bleeding? See, the options given were very confusing, but the answer was very simple. See, if you give propranolol, propylthiouracil and betamethasone as a steroid, these are the treatment plans for thyroid storm. So they are actually to reduce the thyroid levels. They mostly are used to reduce the peripheral conversions or to release of the thyroid hormone from the gland. But potassium iodide is used to reduce the the vascularity. So this is given pre-operatively so that we can achieve clean planes during the surgery. So answer was this, and it was an easy question if you would have ruled out the other options that these are for thyroid storm. And remember, the drug of choice for intraoperative conditions or to bring the euthyroid level, which is the main pre-operative preparation we do, that for bringing the patient to the euthyroid level, the drug of choice is carbimazole. Now this is very important. Why it is a drug of choice, why not others? Because this brings instant result. Even if you give this drug just day before the surgery in the evening, it will bring the patient to the euthyroid level and you can easily perform the surgery. Now next very important question again on the complications of the surgery. A patient operated for thyroid surgery for the swelling, later in the evening developed difficulty in breathing and there was a swelling in the neck. Immediate management would be, see, the post-operative respiratory distress as a complication most commonly occurs because of the laryngeal edema. This is the most common cause. The other causes can be like tension hematoma. So if there is a hematoma that develops, question may it has indicated swelling in the neck and there is a difficulty in breathing, then the immediate management is you evacuate it. You open the wound suture in the ward and immediately evacuate it because it can cause death of the patient if breathing problems continue. Then next cause can be bilateral recurrent laryngeal nerve injury, because of the aspiration risk and laryngomalacia. And specifically 48 to 72 hours later, the cause for the respiratory distress can also be hypoparathyroidism, which mostly occurs because of the vascular insult during the surgery. Now next question, the recurrent laryngeal nerve is in close association with inferior thyroid artery. You might be knowing about the anatomy, so just revise from that. Which of the following nerve is least injured during the thyroid surgery? See, if it is not visible properly, then I'll read out that the first option they gave is a recurrent laryngeal nerve, so they're asking least injured. See, recurrent laryngeal nerve is easily dissected or easily cut if the dissection is done above the thyroid cricoid cartilage. If it is done above the cricoid cartilage, ansa cervicalis nerve can be injured if the strap muscles are not cut high up. And external laryngeal nerve is easily cut if we cut near the superior pole of the thyroid. But marginal mandibular nerve is above the hyoid, or above the plane of cut or the plane of incision. So this is least likely to be injured. Now next very important topic under this is the parathyroid adenomas. The parathyroid gland from which mostly questions are asked from the adenoma. So 3 questions have been asked and there has been no repeat. So this makes the topic as a whole important. See, a female with classical history of hyperparathyroidism was given and they asked the diagnosis. So what are the symptoms of a hyperparathyroid patient? See, these are the symptoms and you can remember it with a mnemonic: stone bones, abdominal groans, thrones and psychiatric overtones. See, because of the increased calcium, there will be preferably kidney stones, nephrocalcinosis, diabetes insipidus, and there can be kidney failure as well. And in case of bones, because there will be a dissolution of the calcium from the bone, so bone related complications like osteoporosis, osteomalacia, and even osteitis fibrosa. And in abdominal groans, symptoms like constipation, indigestion, nausea, vomiting, and even peptic ulcers and acute pancreatitis features can be there. And in thrones, we have mostly polyuria and constipation, and in psychiatric overtones, it affects the central nervous system, mainly lethargy, fatigue, and others. So just mug up this point, this is important. Next question, a parathyroid adenoma most commonly involves the inferior parathyroid lobe. This is important. If it occurs, the most common location is near the inferior parathyroid lobe. Features to differentiate a parathyroid adenoma from hyperplasia. See, in adenoma, there might be an enlargement of a single or 1 or 2 gland, but in hyperplasia, there will be hyperplasia of all the 4 glands at the surgery. When you perform the surgery, if all the 4 glands are equally showing hyperplasia, it is mostly, parathyroid hyperplasia, but if 1 or 2 glands are enlarged, it is mostly adenoma. Now, this is the last topic and from which mostly one question has been asked till now, and that's goiter. So what is true they are asking? See, colloid goiter mostly presents with hyperthyroidism? No. Thyroid storm's clinical features are primarily due to increased thyroxine, not thyroxine, it is T3. See, remember T4 to T3 conversion, when it increases significantly, it can cause thyroid storm. Excessive calcium intake can lead to hyperthyroidism, no relevance. Goiter more than 5% of the population is endemic goiter. This is an absolutely correct statement. If more than 5% of the population of a particular area is having goiter, it is endemic to that areas. So with this, we have completed 52 more questions from the topic thyroid and parathyroid. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe because your responses are motivation, and keep studying. Goodbye.